Welcome to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. I am Dr. Gary Irwin Kenyon, creator of this series. In this and the following two episodes, I will be in conversation with Ashley King and Daphne Noonan. They are co-founders of Person-Centered Universe. In this first episode, we will hear the story of how Person-Centered Universe began. In the second episode, Daphne and Ashley will tell us about their experiences and challenges as entrepreneurs and what Person-Centered Universe offers their clients. Then in the third episode, we will hear their views on working in healthcare and long-term care during our present world situation. So, how are you guys? You're outside in the fresh air, Daphne, I see.
Yes, I am. I'm enjoying I'm at the beginning of a 2-week vacation in PEI, which is home for me. So it's lovely to be here after several months of not being able to get across that bridge. So I was pretty happy yesterday.
Yeah, and I'm sure you really are both of you are richly deserving of a vacation. So
Well, thank you. It does feel that way. I never say that, but the last few months have been a little bit tumultuous. So it's nice to be able to have a rest. And
absolutely necessary. And Ashley, are you in Fredericton or?
I'm in Mill Cove today, but I would agree that I'm very, very much looking forward to taking a few days off here, probably next week, and rest and recharge after a very crazy pandemic while running a business and, leading in a nursing home.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're going to have a hopefully relaxing conversation together here. So I will begin by saying that I'm Dr. Gary Irwin Kenyon, author of the book Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, which is available from Amazon, Indigo, and Friesen Press, and soon to be an audiobook on Amazon Audible. I'm your host today. I'm very pleased to invite special guests and former students of mine, graduates of our gerontology program at St. Thomas University, to be with us today, Ashley King and Daphne Noonan. We have also worked together after graduation when you were at York Care Center, and I was invited to teach Tai Chi to the residents and staff there. I'm also proud to say that Daphne has a chapter in a book, an edited book that Dr. Bill Randall and I did some years ago called Storying Later Life. We're really into stories, life stories. That book is also available on Amazon. It's a special occurrence for an undergraduate student to be invited to publish at that point in their careers. Ashley and Daphne are co-founders of Person-Centered Universe, which we will hear about today. I would characterize Person-Centered Universe as a vision, a concept, and a business that is transforming dementia care, and I think has implications for our wider understanding and imaging the story of the meaning of being an older person. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to mention that previous episodes in this Pathways to Stillness podcast series are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, and have included special guests such as Thomas Moore and Dr. Bill Randall. So without further ado, welcome Daphne and Ashley. Good to be together again, even if it is in the virtual world.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
I feel like we've been seeing you more now that we're virtual than we were in person.
Yeah, that's true. It was just the webinar was not that long ago. It's another really interesting project to do together. Can you two tell me something about the beginnings of Person-Centered Universe? We can go, this is informal, you can talk about your personal life and your professional life, kind of the roots of your background which led to this.
It's really, thank you for asking. And we tend to interrupt one another a lot, so we're going to try really hard not to too much. Maybe I'll start, Ashley, and because I think what you'll really appreciate, Gary, is like kind of how our two stories merged really to kind of form the partnership that is now called Person-Centered Universe. A little bit about my background. I was an undergrad student at St. Thomas in 1997 was my first year. I graduated in 2001. And so Gary was, I don't know if you even know this, Gary, but when I first began my journey, I had all intentions of going into the social work program. Back then, Stu had a concurrent program, so you could do the social work BSW in 4 years. And in my second year of university, I took your course, which was gerontology. It was just, I don't remember what it was called, but it was general, like Gerontology 101 or something like that. Anyway, and then that was the course that kind of made me decide, well, of course, it got me in. It was my gateway, I guess, as you say, to the gerontology world. And then I started signing up for other courses that were related to aging, and I switched my focus. And so then for me, I kind of did things a little bit backward. I went to school at STU, I graduated, I traveled a little bit. And then I did a diploma program in therapeutic recreation for older adults in Toronto and worked in that began my career in long-term care and was very passionate about long-term care from the moment that I got involved. It was like I never planned to be in falling in love with that type of a setting, but that's a very typical story for people who work in long-term care. They kind of stumble upon it and then they fall in love. And so that was my story. And I was living in Toronto, and I decided that I wanted to do my master's in adult education. I've always really liked, presenting and facilitating and really have, being creative in that space or developing programming and things like that. So I came back to Fredericton in 2005 to take a master's in adult education. At that time, as part of my master's, I did an independent study course and received permission from UNB to take Bill's narrative gerontology course at that time because I hadn't taken it when my undergrad. And so that for me was the beginning of and we'll probably come back to this, but the beginning of like the whole narrative, that opened up that whole way of seeing the world is how I call it. It's a perspective as opposed to a theory. It's just like I always say that about narrative. Once you start to see the world in that way, you can't unsee it. Like the genie's out of the bottle and can't, look at things in the same way once you see that everybody's made up of stories. And so began to apply that to my work at York Care Center and had always really specialized in my life as an activity director and working in long-term care in the field of dementia, and then was back to Fredericton. So at the time, and of course, developing renewed relationships with you yourself, Gary, and Bill through the work that I was doing at York Care. And through that came many, many gems of young undergraduate students that were graduating. And I sort of just found that I took a bit of a mentorship role. And I think again, I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but I've always said that I made a point to reach out and to mentor young folks, and I still do that, and Ashley now does it too because you and Bill mentored me, and I was so fortunate to have good mentors in my life and when I was young in my career. And I've always kind of taken that approach of paying it forward and really trying to make sure that if somebody needs to go for a coffee that we do that. And so met Ashley through one of those, I guess, connections through Bill, and she became part of my team at York, and we were kindred spirits. And then she worked on my team for about a year and a half. And this is the point where Ashley's story merges with mine. And your story of Person-Centered Universe being, I guess, born, Ashley, is better than my version. But I was essentially looking for a new direction. And I had been at York for 8 years, and I was starting to feel like I maybe wanted to move on and try something else. And I had learned about a program out of the Bradford University in the UK that offered something called dementia care mapping. And it was a very specific tool that you could be trained in. To me, it was like the answer to every issue that I've ever really encountered in my experience as a dementia practitioner. So helping us to really understand the experience, the real lived experience of someone who's walking with dementia. So I had I had decided to move on and take a new role part-time at the Atlantic Institute on Aging. At that time was alive and well, and I was venturing into this idea of starting a business. And it was really just supposed to be a kind of a labor of love. And I was moving on, and I decided to go and become certified in dementia mapping in Scotland. And one day, I guess I don't even remember Ashley's version of this story as clearly as she does. So I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So how about I start from the beginning and then I'll come back to that
Mm,
story if we can hold it just for a
mhm,
minute. Because, my story of how I got to the story of person-centered universe, I think really identifies I think the trajectory that was set out for me before I even knew it. So
mhm,
I came out of high school and just like, most New Brunswick females, young females coming out of high school, they're social workers like you were going to be, Daphne, or they're teachers like I was going to be. So I started at St. Thomas University with an interest in English, being an English teacher because I had no business teaching math. And so I actually started, and around that time that I was going into university, we were grappling with my grandmother had been living with dementia, and she'd been diagnosed with dementia a few years prior, and living with dementia on her own, and living quite well. But we noticed a pretty significant decline in her capabilities to be living alone. And the first, if I like to weave in stories, and the first memory I have that I recognized, without any prior training as, a high school student, that there was something wrong was when we went in. I was telling somebody about this yesterday, actually. We went into her home and there was this awful smell. And I could not place it, and I didn't know what it was, and I would visit her regularly. Like, I'd visit her every couple of days. We'd kind of manage between my mom, my brother, and I to visit her, and there was this awful smell. And after tearing apart the senior's apartment that she was living in, we found these beautifully laid out chicken breasts on a baking sheet that had never been cooked. And they were put in the oven perfectly, and they were raw, and they'd been raw for a few days. And that was when we realized that it was time to bring Graham to live with us. So as I was starting university, we were transitioning my grandmother into our home, into our family home. And so I started out again. I was still, my intention, I was going to be an English teacher. I was going to get my undergrad and then move on to the postgraduate in education. And it was my second year of university while straddling and being able to pay for my tuition by looking after my gram on the weekends and whatnot as a home care support, that I realized that there was a gerontology course, a study of aging course. It was taught by your colleague, Dr. Bill Randall. And I was hooked the moment that Dr. Randall brought his mother and father in to
mm.
essentially share their experience of aging. And that was the moment that I said, I'm taking every course that St. Thomas University offers in gerontology because I love the methodologies of that concentration. I'm living it when I'm not in school, and I really am seeing the value, and I'm recognizing the passion that I have in these courses. So I really did take, I think, every single gerontology class that was offered at St. Thomas University at the time. And even after graduation, I came back and did a few more because of my interest in what I loved. So after graduating from university, my grandmother passed not long after I did graduate. She did get to watch me graduate, and that was very special. But then I really recognized that I wanted to work in this field. I wanted to work with older adults. I wanted to work with individuals living with dementia. And I wanted to essentially see a better world for people like my Graham who were living in communities, but also in long term care. So Dr. Bill Randall came in again. He sneaks into this story a couple of times, and he actually met me at Tim Hortons, one of his and my favorite places one morning for coffee and asked if I'd be interested in joining the team at York Care Center as an activity coordinator. So, to further add to my studies and also to further my understanding of narrative and all of that information and gerontology and all that information that I'd gathered from St. Thomas, from you and Bill, I I said it was a resounding yes. I was so excited. And so Daphne and I started working together. And I think, like Daphne said, we worked together for about a year and a half. And I found myself, I've worked in various roles within long term care. I worked with young adults living in long term care communities. I worked with general older adult populations, but it wasn't until I went to our neighborhood for individuals living with dementia that I really found, I felt like I was home again. And so that's what really started the business, was because, when Daphne asked me or was telling me about dementia care mapping and the value of dementia care mapping, much like her, I said, this is the answer. This is what we're looking for. Dementia care mapping is really about identifying the quality of life for someone and the quality of care for someone who's living with dementia. And for people who aren't always able to tell us what they need, it's the ability for us to communicate, verbally for them, because so often they're communicating without words. So how can we share those stories, and how can we share that narrative that they're trying to express, often by nonverbal communication? So I'll get back to the story of how person-centered universe really came to be. Daphne, again, as she said, she doesn't remember this story at all. I remember it vividly. We were on our way to one of your classes, Gary, and we were driving in Daphne's, what was it, like a 1999 Ford Taurus?
Oh, I think it was an 89
Yeah.
something, actually, yeah.
And here we were, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to take on the world and the long-term care community and the healthcare community completely. And Daphne looked at me and said, "Would you consider starting a business?" And, you know, even farther history from what I've been sharing, both of my parents are entrepreneurs. The first 10 years of my, career or my jobs, I worked for my family. So I didn't do well under very structured management.
Mhm.
And so working at your care center, it was very much a leadership model for their employees. So for me, the goal was always to be an entrepreneur. It's always what I've wanted to do. I've always seen it as valuable. I've never been afraid of entrepreneurship, if you will. And so when Daphne asked me, do you want to start a business? It was a resounding yes. I think back to that time, definitely realizing that we had a whole lot of passion and a whole lot of excitement, but we didn't
Mm,
have a whole lot of planning
or
um,
experience, yeah.
or experience. But it's really where, that drive to go and present at in one of your classes, Gary, that we
Yeah.
we really decided that we wanted to be able to do more for those living with dementia and
And
those.
there's so many layers of it, like, being full circle, and one thing that you did mention there, Ashley, which is, like, beautiful about this story, is that Ashley's grandmother actually was a fierce entrepreneur. She owned her own hairdressing shop, and she was well known in the Fredericton area for, doing people's hair and providing a really wonderful service. And so, yeah, just many layers to that. So it's a good story. We love telling it, in case you can't tell.
They're both wonderful stories. How the universe evolves,
Mm,
and how, if you're open to things coming your way, or you have an intention, you don't quite know what the heck's going on. I know we've talked before about the entrepreneurial aspect of things, which we could talk about maybe more. There's a lot to talk about with you folks, and probably too much for one session of recording, but we'll see. Thank you for listening to the Pathways to Stillness podcast series. My book, Pathways to Stillness, Reflect, Release, Renew, is available on Amazon, Indigo Chapters, and Friesen Press. It is also available in audiobook form from Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.